Welcome to this lecture on proofs. We will introduce some proof techniques that will prove useful in the rest of the course. In this first segment, we're going to introduce some basic terminology. In other words, we're going to give a bunch of definitions. Let's be clear on the definition of a proof. As you already know, a proof is a valid argument, and the goal of a proof is to establish the truth of a theorem. So this is really a double definition. It also defines a theorem. So what is a theorem? It's the conclusion of a proof or a valid argument. In other words, it's the last line in a proof. So a theorem is a proposition that was proved to be true using a proof. Now, we've already focused on formal proofs. These proofs are very detailed. In fact, they do not skip any detail, and they are written in a formal language like propositional logic or predicate logic. That's what we've been focusing on so far, because we've focused on logic. As we progress throughout this course, we're going to be more interested in informal proofs. Informal proofs are still valid arguments. They are still valid proofs, but they are written mostly in English, so they are not formal, and they also omit some obvious details. And we'll talk about that as the examples come up. So keep in mind the difference between formal proofs, which we've done so far, and informal proofs, which we're going to start to explore in this lecture. Another definition that you need to know is a proposition. A proposition is also a theorem, so it's something that you prove using a proof, but it's a theorem that is not as important as other theorems. So a proposition is a minor theorem. Our next definition is a lemma. A lemma is also a kind of true proposition that was proved, but it's really just an intermediate result. And that result is needed in the proof of another or more than one other theorems. Remember how in a proof every step must be justified, either as a premise or as the application or the result of the application of an inference rule to earlier steps in the proof. But a third way to justify a true proposition or step in a proof is to state that it results from a lemma. And a lemma is another result that you prove before you started your current proof. So in other words, an intermediate result that you need for a later proof. A corollary is yet another kind of theorem, but in that case, it's a theorem that is a consequence of an earlier theorem. And not just any consequence, but it's an easy consequence. It only takes another one or two steps from an existing theorem to prove another theorem. And in that case, that other theorem is called a corollary of the first theorem. A conjecture is completely different. A conjecture is a statement that we believe is true, or that is claimed to be true, but that has not been proved to be true. And in fact, it may be false. So a conjecture is basically a result that people believe is true, but they haven't been able to prove yet. So it's waiting to be proved or disproved. And finally, our last definition in this first segment is an axiom, or also called a postulate. An axiom is a statement that cannot be proved to be true, but that is true. In fact, its truth is agreed upon by everybody. It's basically obvious that it's true, and therefore it can be used as a premise or as a justification in a proof. So, conjectures, axioms are not theorems. A conjecture is not a theorem because it hasn't been proved, and an axiom isn't a theorem, even though it's true, because it cannot be proved. It's just an assumption that everybody agrees is true, and you can use it without having to prove it.